A decorated soldier with his one young child is cast out into the cold night air. Days later, a shocking secret forces those who cast them out to bow their heads and earns the respect of the entire community. Before we dive into the story, where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments below. Now let's get into the story. Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne felt the quiet wrongness of the house the moment he stepped over the threshold. It wasn't one thing he could name, not a single detail out of place. In fact, that was the problem. Everything was in place. The air, cool and tasting of lemon polish and something vaguely sterile, didn't move. It was held captive within the pristine walls of his late wife's sister's home. He'd been gone for 18 months, a final deployment that felt more like a penance than a duty, and this homecoming was the last stop on a long, painful road. The house was supposed to be a sanctuary for his daughter, Lily. Instead, it felt like a museum exhibit titled Suburban Perfection. The throw pillows on the sofa were karate chopped into stiff peaks. The magazines on the coffee table were fanned out in a perfect, unread arc. There wasn't a speck of dust on the gleaming hardwood floors, not a single fingerprint on the glass of the framed photos. Marcus remembered this house from before, from when his wife, Elena, was alive. It had been Carol's house then, too, but Elena's presence had filled it with chaos and laughter. Spills on the carpet, toys underfoot, the warm scent of baking bread overpowering the chemical tang of cleaners. Now, the silence was so profound it had a physical weight. Then he saw her, his daughter. Lily stood at the far end of the long hallway, a small 7-year-old silhouette against the bright light of the kitchen. She wasn't running to him, wasn't shouting "Daddy," the way she used to in his dreams, the ones that got him through the dust-choked nights overseas. She was just standing there, her hands clasped behind her back, her posture unnaturally rigid. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her small shoulders. His heart, which had been a tight, guarded knot for years, clenched with a sharp, unfamiliar pain. He took a step forward, his duffel bag sliding from his shoulder to land on the immaculate floor with a soft thud. "Lily Bug," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She didn't answer. She took a hesitant step toward him, her eyes wide and fixed on his face. As she moved out of the backlighting and into the dimmer light of the hall, he saw it. It wasn't a bruise from a fall, not the kind of jagged scrape a kid gets from playing too hard. On the delicate skin of her left wrist, peeking out from the cuff of her perfectly white, long-sleeved shirt, was a faint, pinkish circle. It was too uniform, too precise. It looked less like an injury and more like a brand. "Oh, Marcus, you're here." Carol bustled in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a crisp white apron tied around her waist. Her smile was wide and bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were busy, scanning, assessing. They flickered from Marcus's face to the duffel bag on her floor, a micro-expression of annoyance crossing her features before being smoothed away. "We were just about to have a snack. Lily, darling, say hello to your Uncle Marcus." Uncle Marcus. The word was a small, sharp stone in his throat. He was her father. But after Elena's death in the car accident he still blamed himself for, the accident that happened while he was a world away. The courts and the counselors had decided a stable home with her maternal aunt was better than the uncertain life of a soldier who was never there. It was a failure that haunted him, a ghost that sat on his chest every night. He had agreed because he thought it was what was best for Lily. He had sacrificed his presence for her stability. Now, looking at the perfectly circular mark on her wrist and the terror in her eyes, he felt a cold dread wash over him. This wasn't stability. This was something else entirely. "What's that on her wrist?" he asked, his voice low and even, the parade ground tone he used when he needed to project calm authority while his insides were screaming. Carol's smile didn't falter. She reached down and gently pulled Lily's sleeve down, covering the mark. "Oh, that silly girl took a tumble yesterday. She fell against the corner of the new end table. You know how clumsy she can be." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that didn't fit the oppressive silence of the house. "It's just a little bump. I put some ointment on it." Marcus looked from Carol's placid face to the end table in the living room. Its corners were sharp, squared off. They wouldn't leave a circular mark. His training, the years of learning to observe, to see what was there and not what he was told was there, kicked in. He saw the way Lily flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her body, when Carol's hand touched her sleeve. He saw the way Lily's eyes darted to the floor, refusing to meet his. He saw the lie, clear and stark, hanging in the sterile air between them. He had come home expecting to find a child who missed him, a child he would have to slowly win back. He had not come home expecting to start a war. But as he looked at his silent, haunted daughter, he knew, with the chilling certainty of a sniper settling his crosshairs, that a war was exactly what he had found. He just didn't know the enemy yet. Not really. He forced a tight, brittle smile. "Good to be home, Carol. Thanks for taking such good care of her." The lie felt like acid on his tongue. The dinner that evening was an exercise in supreme tension. Marcus sat at one end of the long, polished mahogany table, Carol at the other, and Lily was a small, isolated island between them. The table was set with a precision that bordered on pathological. The forks were aligned with the knives, the water glasses were free of smudges, each placed exactly 1 inch from the tip of the knife. The meal itself was chicken breast, steamed asparagus, and quinoa. It was healthy, colorless, and utterly devoid of joy. Marcus thought of the messy, vibrant meals he and Elena used to share, pasta sauce splattering, laughter echoing off the walls. Here, the only sounds were the delicate clinking of silverware on porcelain and Carol's intermittent, cheerful monologue. "The school had their parent-teacher conferences last week," Carol said, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin. "Mrs. Davison said Lily is a model student. So quiet, so neat. Her work is always pristine. Not like some of the other children, who are just feral." Honestly, she cast a benign smile at Lily, but Marcus saw the warning in it. A warning to remain a model, to be quiet, to be neat. Lily sat ramrod straight in her chair, her small hands in her lap when she wasn't using her fork. She took tiny, precise bites, chewing each one a dozen times before swallowing. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, as if she were afraid that looking up would cause a mess. Marcus watched her, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. This was not his daughter. His Lily was a whirlwind. She was messy hair and grass-stained knees. She was a loud, happy, curious little girl who liked to build forts out of couch cushions and finger paint with her whole hands. This child was a ghost, a pale imitation wearing his daughter's face. "Lily," Marcus said, his voice gentle, "you still like to draw." Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a flicker of something. Was it fear or hope? She looked at Carol, a quick, questioning glance. Carol answered for her. "Oh, absolutely. She has a wonderful new set of colored pencils. We keep them all sharpened and organized by color. She does beautiful work in her coloring books, always stays inside the lines. Show Uncle Marcus your garden picture later, sweetie." The phrase "stays inside the lines" was delivered with a particular emphasis that made Marcus's skin crawl. It wasn't a compliment. It was a command. He wanted to scream. He wanted to sweep the perfectly arranged plates off the table and tell Lily it was okay to make a mess, to be a child. But he couldn't. He was on enemy soil, behind the lines, and a single wrong move could make things worse for his daughter. He was a guest in this house. For now. He forced himself to eat the bland chicken. "That sounds great, Carol. You're doing a wonderful job with her." The words were a necessary camouflage. He needed to be the grateful, slightly disconnected soldier, the man who trusted her implicitly. He needed her to believe he saw what she wanted him to see. A perfect home, a perfect child, a perfect guardian. Later, after the kitchen was scrubbed clean and Lily was sent upstairs to get ready for bed, Marcus felt a wave of claustrophobia. "I think I'll get some air," he announced, heading for the front door. "Don't be long," Carol called after him. "Lily has a very strict bedtime. Routine is so important for children." The cool night air was a relief, washing the sterile scent of the house from his lungs. He walked down the quiet suburban street, the houses dark and sleeping. His mind raced, replaying every detail. The circular mark, The flinch, the unnatural quiet, the obsession with neatness. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling back through old photos. He stopped on one from 3 years ago. It was Lily's 4th birthday. He and Elena were with her in their small, cluttered backyard. Lily was covered head to toe in mud from a puddle she'd gleefully jumped in. She had a wide, unrestrained grin on her face. Mud streaked across her cheek. Elena was laughing, her arms wrapped around Marcus, and he was looking at his daughter with a love so pure and fierce it ached. He stared at the photo, the vibrant, chaotic joy of it a stark, brutal contrast to the silent, colorless girl he'd had dinner with. He had let this happen. His absence had created the vacuum that Carol's cold, sterile control had filled. The guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest. He had failed Elena. He had failed his daughter. He looked back at the house, its windows glowing with a cold, unwelcoming light. No, he thought, his jaw tightening. The failure ends now. My mission has changed. He wasn't just here to visit. He was here on a rescue operation, and he would not leave until his daughter was safe. The next morning, Marcus began his quiet reconnaissance. He knew direct confrontation was a losing strategy. Carol held all the cards: legal guardianship, the home, the veneer of normalcy. He needed evidence. He needed proof that his gut feeling was more than just the grief of an absent father. He needed an ally. He waited until Carol announced she was running to a specialty grocery store across town. A trip, she said, would take at least an hour. Lily will be fine here, she'd said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She has her reading assignment. She's not a baby. Marcus, the moment her car pulled out of the driveway. Marcus turned to Lily, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a book open in front of her, though her eyes weren't moving across the page. "Hey, Lilybug," he said softly. "I'm just going to go for a quick walk around the block. I'll be right back." She just nodded, her gaze fixed on the book. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. Marcus didn't walk around the block. He walked directly next door, to the small, tidy brick house belonging to Mrs. Gable. He remembered her from years ago, a kind, grandmotherly woman who always had cookies for Lily and had doted on Elena. He prayed she was still the woman he remembered. He knocked on her door, and after a moment, it opened a crack. An eye, clouded with age but still sharp, peered out at him. "Marcus Thorne," she breathed, opening the door wider. "My goodness, I heard you were coming home." "It's good to see you, Mrs. Gable," he said, offering a small smile. "Do you have a minute?" She ushered him into a living room that was the polar opposite of Carol's. It was cluttered with books, knitting projects, and framed photos of grandchildren. It smelled of lavender and old paper, felt like a home. "I won't beat around the bush," Marcus started, keeping his voice low. "I'm worried about Lily." Mrs. Gable's friendly demeanor evaporated. A look of deep, weary sadness took its place. She wrung her hands in her lap. "Oh dear," she whispered. "I was afraid of this. I hoped when you came back." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "Afraid of what?" Marcus pressed, his heart pounding. "Please, anything you can tell me. It's not one big thing, Marcus. It's 1,000 little things," she said, her voice trembling. "After you lost dear Elena, Carol changed. Or maybe she was always that way and Elena just balanced her out. The house got quieter, colder. I used to hear Lily laughing in the backyard all the time, giggling, shouting, the sounds a child makes. And then, about a year ago, it just stopped. There was no more laughter." She took a shaky breath. "Then came the other sounds. The scrubbing. Always the scrubbing. Sometimes late at night, I'd be in my garden and I could hear it through the bathroom window. A harsh, frantic sound. And sometimes I'd hear Lily crying. Not a tantrum cry. Pained, pleading cry. I called once. I called the Child Services hotline. Anonymously. A nice woman came, I saw her car. She talked to Carol on the porch for 10 minutes. Carol was all smiles, so charming. She brought Lily out. She was wearing a pretty dress. Her hair was in perfect ribbons. The woman left. Nothing changed. If anything, Mrs. Gable looked at him, her eyes full of guilt. It got quieter after that. I was afraid I'd made it worse for her. The scrubbing. The word clicked into place with the circular mark on Lily's wrist. A cold, sickening realization began to dawn in Marcus's mind. He thanked Mrs. Gable, his mind reeling. Her testimony was anecdotal, but it was the validation he needed. He wasn't imagining it. He returned to Carol's house just minutes before she did, his face a mask of calm. Later that afternoon, he found his second piece of evidence. Carol was on the phone in her home office, her voice low and tense. Marcus took the opportunity to go into Lily's room under the pretense of putting away some laundry he'd offered to fold. The room was as sterile as the rest of the house. The bed was made with military precision. The toys were arranged on a shelf, untouched. It looked like a showroom, not a child's bedroom. He ran his hand under the mattress, a soldier's instinct to check for hidden items. His fingers brushed against a piece of paper. He pulled it out. It was a drawing done in crayon. It depicted a stick figure of a little girl, clearly labeled me, above her head, standing in a bathtub. The girl was crying, with big, blue teardrops falling from her eyes. Her arms and legs were covered in angry, red, swirling circles. Standing over the tub was a large, dark, shadowy figure. It had a woman's dress, but its face was a furious scribble. And in its hand, it held not a hand, but a giant bristly brush. Marcus stared at the drawing, his blood turning to ice. The red, swirling circles. The brush. Mrs. Gable's words about the scrubbing. The circular mark on Lily's wrist. It all coalesced into a single, horrific picture. This wasn't about discipline. This wasn't about a fall. Carol wasn't just cleaning the house. She was scrubbing his daughter. He carefully folded the drawing and slipped it into his pocket. He smoothed the bedspread, his hands moving with automatic precision while his mind was a storm of cold, calculated fury. He now had a witness and he had a confession, written in the crayon of a 7-year-old. The cracks in Carol's perfect wall were beginning to show, and he was going to hammer a wedge into every single one of them until the whole facade came crashing down. The drawing was a map. It pointed to a location, a method, an instrument. The battleground was the bathroom, and the weapon was a brush. Marcus knew he had to see it for himself. He had to hold the instrument of his daughter's torture in his own hands. The challenge was access. Lily had her own bathroom, a small, sterile space connected to her bedroom. But the monster in the drawing, the shadowy figure of Carol, suggested the acts took place in her domain. Her private space. The master bathroom. He needed a diversion, a way to get Carol out of the way long enough for a thorough search. An opportunity presented itself the next day. Carol was in the midst of what she called a deep clean of the kitchen, a task she undertook with the grim determination of a surgeon. Marcus was in the living room, pretending to read a book on military history, his mind anything but calm. He was timing her movements, learning her rhythms. He waited for the moment she had the heavy floor polisher out, its loud whirring providing acoustic cover. He stood up, walked into the kitchen as if to get a glass of water, and with a feigned stumble, knocked a tall vase of perfectly arranged white lilies off the counter. Water and flowers cascaded onto the pristine floor. "Oh, damn it. Carol, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice a perfect blend of apology and frustration. Carol's head whipped around, her eyes wide with fury. For a split second, her mask of serene control slipped, and he saw the raw, twitching rage beneath. It was the same look he'd seen on the faces of fanatics, a terrifying certainty in their own righteousness. "Marcus, my floor. I just waxed it. I know, I'm so sorry. It was clumsy of me. Where are the big towels?" "In the laundry room," he asked, deliberately suggesting the furthest possible location. No, they're in the upstairs hall closet," she snapped, her voice tight. "Don't move. You'll track water everywhere." "I'll get it." She practically ran from the room, her focus entirely on the violation of her clean floor. The moment she was up the stairs, Marcus moved. He didn't go to the hall closet. He slipped down the short corridor to the master bedroom and into her private bathroom. The air was thick with the scent of bleach and ammonia, so strong it made his eyes water. Like the rest of the house, it was immaculate. White tiles, chrome fixtures polished to a mirror sheen, a glass shower door without a single water spot. It was less a bathroom and more a surgical theater. He started his search. Under the sink. He opened the cabinet doors. Inside, it was a fortress of cleaning supplies. Bottles of industrial-strength solvents, disinfectants, and polishes were arranged in neat rows, labels facing forward. He pushed them aside, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear Carol's footsteps upstairs, the opening and closing of the closet door. He had seconds. His fingers brushed against a canvas bag tucked away at the very back, behind a gallon jug of bleach. He pulled it out. It was heavy. He unzipped it. His breath caught in his throat. Inside, nestled on a clean white towel, were 3 brushes. They weren't for hair. They weren't for cleaning floors. They were stiff, industrial-grade scrubbing brushes, the kind used to scour grime from concrete or strip paint from wood. The bristles were dense, hard plastic, sharp to the touch. One of them, a round-headed brush, had bristles that were faintly, almost imperceptibly, stained pink. He stared at them, the world narrowing to the objects in his hands. He pictured them in Carol's grasp, her face contorted in that brief flash of rage he'd seen. He pictured her using them on his daughter's soft skin, scrubbing, scrubbing away some imagined dirt, some perceived imperfection, some part of Lily that reminded her of the messy, chaotic joy of her sister, Elena. The circular mark on Lily's wrist. It was from the round-headed brush, held down and twisted. The thought was so horrific, so monstrous, that a wave of pure, black rage washed over him. He wanted to take these brushes and march out there and... He forced the feeling down, his military discipline clamping down on the inferno inside him like a steel lid. Emotion was a liability. Rage would get him thrown out of the house and lose him access to Lily. He needed strategy. He needed cold, hard logic. He took a photo of the brushes with his phone, his hand shaking slightly. He zipped the bag, placed it exactly where he had found it, behind the bleach, and arranged the other bottles in front of it. He slipped out of the bathroom just as Carol was coming down the stairs, her arms laden with towels. "Honestly, Marcus," she huffed, not even looking at him as she knelt to attack the puddle. "Sometimes I think men are genetically incapable of being careful." He just stood there, his hands clenched into fists in his pockets, his face a granite mask. "You're right, Carol," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "My mistake." He was no longer just a father. He was a soldier with a confirmed enemy position and a clear understanding of their methods. The mission was no longer reconnaissance. It was now about gathering final intelligence and planning the assault. The discovery of the brushes changed everything. The fight was no longer internal. It had a physical, tangible reality. Marcus now operated with the quiet, hyper-aware patience of a man on a long-range patrol deep in hostile territory. Every word, every gesture was calculated. He had to maintain his cover as the grateful, slightly oblivious soldier while his mind was a whirlwind of strategic planning. His first move was to call in reinforcements. He went for another walk, this time circling the block twice to ensure he wasn't observed, before dialing a number he knew by heart. "Jackson," he said when the call was answered. "It's Thorne." "Marcus. Hell of a thing to hear your voice. Everything all right?" Jackson was an old army buddy, a man who had served in intelligence and now ran a very discreet, very effective private investigation firm. They had saved each other's lives more than once. The trust between them was absolute. "No, everything is not all right," Marcus said, his voice tight. "I need a full workup, deep background, on a civilian, Carol Albright, my sister-in-law." There was a pause on the other end. Jackson knew about Elena, about Lily. He didn't need the details to understand the gravity of the request. "Sealed records? Juvenile? Financial? Give me the parameters." "Everything," Marcus said. I need to know what makes her tick. I need to know what broke her. I'm sending you her details now. I need it yesterday, Jack. Consider it done, Jackson replied without hesitation. Stay safe, brother. Hanging up, Marcus felt a sliver of control return. He had an asset in the field. Now he had to endure. That afternoon, Carol insisted on a nice family outing to a local botanical garden. The excursion was a surreal form of torture for Marcus. He had to walk beside this woman, listen to her prattle on about the Latin names of flowers, and watch her place a proprietary hand on Lily's shoulder. He watched as Lily walked with careful, measured steps on the paved path, her eyes downcast, her body language screaming a desperate plea not to draw attention, not to step on a flower bed, not to be a problem. Marcus played his part. He smiled. He nodded. He took pictures on his phone, of Carol and Lily smiling stiffly for the camera, of Lily looking at a butterfly with a flicker of her old wonder before her eyes darted to Carol for approval. To any outside observer, they were a picture of a healing family. A loving aunt, a visiting father, a quiet child. But Marcus saw the truth. He was a prisoner of war, and his daughter was in the cell next to him. He was a bodyguard who couldn't show his weapon. The strain of the performance was immense, a constant, grinding pressure. That evening was the turning point. The house was quiet. Carol was in her office, balancing her checkbook, an activity she performed with religious fervor. Marcus was sitting in the living room, the book from the day before open on his lap, its words a meaningless blur. Lily came downstairs. She wasn't supposed to be down. It was after her designated quiet time in her room. She walked silently on the plush carpet, her small feet making no sound. She didn't approach him directly. She went to the other side of the room and sat on the floor, her back against the wall. In her arms, she clutched a small, worn teddy bear with one button eye. Marcus recognized it instantly. It was Barnaby, the bear he and Elena had given her for her first birthday. It was worn from years of love, its fur matted, its one good eye staring out with a kind of sad wisdom. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the frantic scratching of Carol's pen from the office. Marcus didn't speak. He knew this was a delicate truce, a moment that could be shattered by a single wrong word. He just sat, his presence a steady, unmoving anchor in the room. Finally, Lily looked up at him. Her eyes, so often clouded with fear, were clear and direct. She held the bear a little tighter. She took a small, hitching breath, and in a voice so quiet it was barely a whisper, a sound meant only for him, she said, "The bear is dirty." The 4 words hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a child's observation. It was a message. It was a cry for help, coded in the language of her torment. She was the bear. She was considered dirty, and she was telling him. In that moment, his resolve, already case-hardened, was forged into something unbreakable. He gave her a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a signal received and understood. Lily looked at him for a second longer, a flicker of understanding in her own eyes. Then, as silently as she had appeared, she stood up and walked back upstairs, taking her worn, dirty bear with her. Marcus sat frozen, the book forgotten in his lap. The soldier's patience had been rewarded. His daughter had just given him her testimony, and now he would burn the world down to save her. 2 days later, Jackson called back. The timing was critical. Carol was at a neighborhood association meeting, a public performance of her civic duty. Marcus sat in his rental car in a nearby park, the phone pressed to his ear, as Jackson laid out the buried past of Carol Albright. The information was delivered in Jackson's typical, dispassionate tone, but the details were chilling. "It's not pretty, Marcus," Jackson began. "Carol and Elena's upbringing. It wasn't good. Their mother was a zealot, not religious, but obsessed with cleanliness and order. A pathological case of OCD, undiagnosed in the 50s. The house was a shrine to sterility. The father was a non-entity, totally beaten down. The girls were punished for any infraction. A spilled glass of milk, A smudge on the wall, grass stains on their clothes. The punishments were always the same. They were cleansed. Marcus's blood ran cold. Cleansed? Yeah. Locked in the bathroom. Scrubbed raw with harsh soap and brushes. The mother called it scrubbing the sin out. Elena, from what I can piece together from school records and a note from a concerned teacher, rebelled. She was messy on purpose. She fought back. She got the worst of it, but she never broke. She got out of there the second she turned 18 and never looked back. Marcus thought of Elena. Her vibrant, chaotic, loving spirit. It was a survival mechanism. She had built a life that was the absolute antithesis of her childhood. Carol went the other way, Jackson continued, his voice grim. She embraced it, became the perfect daughter. Neat, quiet, obedient. She was praised for her cleanliness, for her order. It was her shield. But it gets worse. When she was 15, there was an incident. A neighbor's golden retriever got into some mud and ran through their yard. Carol lured the dog into her garage. When the neighbor found it hours later, she was trying to cleanse it with a wire brush and bleach. The dog survived, but just barely. The family was influential. They hushed it up, sent Carol away to a special school for 6 months. Her juvenile record was sealed. A wire brush, bleach, the monster in Lily's drawing, the industrial brushes under the sink. It was all the same pattern, a twisted, pathological cycle repeating itself. Carol wasn't just being cruel. She was broken, shattered by her own past, and was now projecting her trauma, her mother's voice, her mother's methods, onto the nearest, most vulnerable target. Elena's daughter. The daughter of the sister who escaped. The daughter who was a living reminder of the messy, vibrant life Carol could never have. It wasn't just about cleanliness. It was about jealousy. It was about resentment. It was about erasing Elena's legacy. As Marcus absorbed the horrifying information, his own past failure rose up to meet it. He remembered the last phone call with Elena, just before the accident. He was on a satellite phone from a forward operating base. He was tired, distracted. She was telling him about a leak in the roof, about Lily learning to ride a bike, about how much she missed him. He had been short with her, preoccupied with an upcoming mission. "I gotta go, Lena," he'd said. "I'll call you next week." He never got the chance. The guilt of that final, dismissive conversation was a wound that had never healed. He had failed to be present for Elena. He was a world away when she needed him. That was his sin, his own dirt. He hung up with Jackson, his resolve hardening into something cold and absolute. He understood his enemy now completely. He knew her history, her pathology, her motive. He drove back to the house, his mind no longer on defense, but on the attack. As he pulled into the driveway, he heard a sound that made his stomach drop. A crash, followed by a sharp, piercing wail from inside the house. Lily. He didn't bother with the key. He slammed the car door and sprinted to the front door, bursting inside. The scene was in the living room. A porcelain vase lay shattered on the floor, water and white lilies spread across the perfect rug. Lily was on her knees, crying, her small hands trying futilely to pick up the broken shards. And standing over her was Carol, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her perfect composure was gone, stripped away by the violation of a broken object. "Look what you did, you clumsy, filthy girl," Carol shrieked, her voice high and ragged. "You are just like her, just like your mother, always making a mess, always ruining everything." She raised her hand, and for a terrifying second, Marcus thought she was going to strike Lily. He moved, crossing the room in 2 long strides, his body a wall between Carol and his daughter. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Carol, his eyes filled with a cold, lethal calm that was far more terrifying than any shout. Carol froze, her hands still in the air. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time she saw him. Not the grieving, disconnected soldier, but the man he was now, the protector, the threat. Her face paled, the rage replaced by a dawning panic. She had made a mistake. She had lost control. She had shown him her true face. Marcus knelt, ignoring Carol completely. He gently took Lily's hands, pulling them away from the sharp porcelain. "It's okay, Lily Bug," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's okay. Daddy's here." He had all the pieces now. The witness, the confession, the weapon, the motive, and now the mistake, the public unmasking. The time for patience was over. The time for confrontation was now. The plan had to be precise. Marcus knew that if he simply confronted Carol alone, she would deny everything, paint him as an unstable, grieving soldier trying to steal her niece. He needed a witness. He needed to shatter her facade in a controlled environment where her reaction would be undeniable. He chose the next afternoon. He called Mrs. Gable. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's important. I need you to come over for tea in 1 hour. Carol has invited you. She doesn't know it yet, but she has." There was a pause, and then a quiet, "I'll be there." Next, he went to Carol. He found her in the kitchen, scrubbing at the spot on the rug where the vase had shattered, even though there was no visible stain. Her movements were frantic, obsessive. "Carol," he said, his voice calm and even, "I'm leaving tomorrow. I just wanted to thank you for everything. I was thinking, maybe we could have Mrs. Gable over for a cup of tea this afternoon? As a small thank you from me to both of you." Carol stopped scrubbing, surprised. The offer was a peace offering, a return to the status quo. It was a chance for her to reassert her control, to prove that the incident yesterday was an aberration. He could see the calculation in her eyes. "Why, Marcus?" she said, her smile returning, though it was brittle. "That's a lovely idea. I'll get out the good china." An hour later, the scene was set. The three of them sat in the suffocatingly perfect living room. The good china was on the table, along with a plate of small, perfect, joyless cookies. Lily was there, too, sitting on a small stool by the fireplace, instructed to be seen and not heard. She was clutching Barnaby the bear. The small talk was excruciating. Marcus let Carol lead, let her perform her role as the gracious hostess, the pillar of the community. He listened to her talk about the neighborhood association, about her garden, about the importance of standards. He was letting her build her own cage. Finally, he made his move. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out the folded crayon drawing. He smoothed it out on the coffee table next to the perfect cookies. "Lily, I found this in your room the other day," he said, his voice soft but carrying across the silent room. "It's a very powerful drawing. I was hoping you could tell us about it." The air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carol froze, a porcelain teacup halfway to her lips. Mrs. Gable leaned forward slightly, her old eyes fixed on the drawing. Lily looked up, her knuckles white where she gripped her bear. "What is that?" Carol asked, her voice sharp. "It's a drawing," Marcus said, not looking at her. His focus was on his daughter. "It's a picture of a little girl in a bathtub. And there's a monster with a brush for a hand." He tapped the shadowy figure. "Can you tell me about the monster, Lilybug?" Absolute silence. Carol placed her teacup down with a loud clatter. "That's enough, Marcus. You're upsetting her. It's just a silly, morbid drawing. She has an overactive imagination." "Does she?" Marcus finally turned his gaze on Carol. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Because I also found these." He pulled out his phone, swiped to the photo he'd taken, and placed it on the table next to the drawing. The image was stark and clear. The 3 industrial scrubbing brushes nestled in their canvas bag. "In your bathroom, Carol. Tucked behind the bleach." Carol's face went completely white. The blood drained from it, leaving a waxy, pale mask. Her eyes darted from the phone to Marcus's face to Mrs. Gable, who was now staring at her with undisguised horror. How dare you?" Carol stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "You went through my things? This is my house. This is my daughter's prison," Marcus countered, his voice like steel. "You scrubbed her, didn't you, Carol? Just like your mother scrubbed you and Elena." You scrubbed her to get the sin out, to get the dirt out. But the dirt wasn't on Lily. The dirt was you. All the filth from your childhood that you've been carrying around. You were scrubbing her to erase her mother. That was the final blow. Carol's composure, already cracked, shattered into a million pieces. "No!" she shrieked, leaping to her feet. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect, loving aunt dissolved into hideous, raw rage. She was just like her. Messy, disobedient. I saved her. I was making her clean. I was making her perfect. You have no idea what it took. The sacrifices I made. Ungrateful. You are all ungrateful. Her tirade was wild, hysterical. A torrent of poison and self-pity that filled the room. Mrs. Gable gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. And then, in the midst of the storm, a small, quiet act of defiance occurred. Lily, who had been frozen on her stool, looked at Carol's screaming, contorted face. She looked at her father's calm, steady presence. She dropped Barnaby the bear onto the floor, stood up on her small, shaky legs, and walked across the room. She didn't run. She walked with a deliberate, solemn purpose. She walked right past the screaming Carol, right past the horrified Mrs. Gable, and stood next to Marcus. Then her small, trembling hand reached out and took his. The power in the room shifted instantly and irrevocably. The screaming stopped. Carol stared at the sight of Lily choosing Marcus, her face crumbling in defeat. In that moment, she wasn't a monster. She was just a broken, pathetic woman who had lost everything. The facade had not just shattered. It had been ground into dust. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. 2 sharp, authoritative rings. Marcus didn't need to answer it. He had made a call before Mrs. Gable ever arrived. He had told his contact at the county's Child Protective Services, a woman he'd been connected to through Jackson, that he would be initiating a confrontation and that a witness would be present. He had told her to be ready. Marcus, with Lily's hand held firmly in his, walked to the door and opened it. A calm, professional-looking woman stood there, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Her eyes took in the scene in an instant. The shattered-looking Carol, the horrified Mrs. Gable, and Marcus standing with the small, silent child. "We received a call expressing concern for the welfare of a minor, Lily Thorne," the CPS worker said, her voice calm but firm. "May we come in?" The cascade had begun. The arrival of the authorities broke the spell of fear that had held the house and its neighbors in thrall. Mrs. Gable, who had been a reluctant, fearful witness, now felt safe. Her testimony, delivered in her own living room away from Carol's presence, was a flood of damning detail. She spoke of the frantic scrubbing sounds at all hours, the pained cries she tried to ignore, the day Lily's laughter stopped. She talked about the CPS visit she had triggered a year ago, and how Carol had charmed the caseworker, presenting a perfect child in a perfect dress, making Mrs. Gable herself feel like a meddling fool. Her words, now filled with the conviction of a person whose worst fears had been validated, painted a vivid picture of long-term, systematic psychological torture. While Mrs. Gable gave her statement, the police conducted a search of the house. It wasn't a frantic rummaging. It was a methodical, procedural dismantling of Carol's world. They didn't need Marcus's photo. They found the canvas bag of brushes exactly where he said it would be. In Lily's bathroom, they found towels that, under forensic light, showed trace amounts of blood. They found the locked cabinets of cleaning supplies. Every piece of evidence they uncovered corroborated the story told by the crayon drawing, by Mrs. Gable's testimony, by the very air in the sterile, cold house. Carol, meanwhile, had completely collapsed. The hysterical rage was gone, replaced by a vacant, disconnected state. She sat on her perfect sofa, surrounded by the authorities who were methodically taking apart her life, and stared blankly at the wall. She offered no resistance. When the police officer informed her that she was being taken into custody and that a 72-hour psychiatric hold was being placed on her, she simply nodded, as if she were being told the time. The fight had gone out of her, leaving an empty shell. Marcus watched them lead her out of the house. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at Lily. She looked like a stranger being escorted from a stranger's home. The monster had vanished, and all that remained was the broken woman. The true reckoning came as the sun began to set. The CPS worker, a woman named Ms. Alvarez with kind, tired eyes, sat with Marcus at the mahogany dining table. Lily was upstairs with a female officer, a specialist in child interviews, who was simply sitting with her, not asking questions, just providing a calm presence. "Master Sergeant Thorne," Ms. Alvarez began, looking through her notes. "Given the evidence, the witness testimony, and the clear and present danger to the child, we have grounds for immediate removal. Your sister-in-law will be facing multiple felony charges, including injury to a child. The psychiatric evaluation will determine the next steps for her, but I can tell you with certainty she will not be returning to this house or having contact with Lily for a very long time, if ever." She paused, looking at him directly. "You are listed as the child's biological father. You relinquished temporary custody due to your service. We would like to place Lily in your emergency custody, effective immediately. Is that something you are prepared for?" The question hung in the air. Prepared? How could anyone be prepared for this? To suddenly become the sole guardian of a traumatized child? To rebuild a life from the ashes of another? He thought of his small, Spartan apartment near the base. He thought of his own ghosts, his own guilt. He was terrified. But then he thought of Lily's small hand in his, a silent declaration of trust. He thought of his promise to Elena. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "I am prepared." The world outside Carol's house was dark when Marcus finally carried Lily outside for the last time. She had fallen asleep in his arms while Ms. Alvarez finished the paperwork. He held her close, her small body warm against his chest, a precious, fragile weight. He walked past the police cars, past the curious, whispering neighbors who had finally emerged from their homes and didn't look back. He strapped her gently into the passenger seat of his rental car, her head lolling to the side, Barnaby the bear still clutched in her hand. He drove away from the perfect house on the perfect street, the scene of the crime, the site of his daughter's silent war. The first night of their new life was spent in a generic hotel room off the highway. The room was clean but impersonal, smelling of stale air conditioning and disinfectant. It was a neutral space, a blank slate. Marcus laid Lily down on one of the beds. He took off her shoes and covered her with the thin comforter. He sat in the lumpy armchair in the corner of the room and just watched her breathe. He was on guard duty, a post he would never again abandon. In the middle of the night, a small, choked cry woke him from a light doze. Lily was sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with a terror that saw things that weren't in the room. She was breathing in short, panicked gasps. Marcus was by her side in an instant. His first instinct was to pull her into a hug, to hold her tight and tell her she was safe. But he stopped himself. He remembered the flinching. He remembered the years of unwanted, violent touch. He couldn't risk being another source of fear. So he did the only thing he could think of. He pulled the other armchair to the side of her bed, sat down and said, "I'm right here, Lilybug. You're safe. I'm not going anywhere." He didn't touch her. He just sat there, a solid, unmoving presence in the dim light of the hotel room. After a few long minutes, her panicked breathing began to slow. Her shoulders, which had been up by her ears, began to relax. She lay back down, her eyes still fixed on him. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. He understood. He sat there for the rest of the night, an unwavering sentinel, watching over his daughter's fragile sleep. The legal and psychological fallout for Carol was swift and decisive. Deemed unfit to stand trial in her current state, she was committed to a secure psychiatric facility. Her diagnosis was a complex tapestry of pathologies: severe obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, pathological projection, and trauma rooted in her own abusive childhood. The doctor said that with years of intensive therapy, she might one day understand the harm she had caused. But the woman who had terrorized Lily was, for all intents and purposes, gone. Justice, in this case, wasn't about punishment but containment. As the sun came up, casting a gray light into the hotel room. Marcus looked at Lily, still sleeping, her face finally peaceful. He felt the immense, terrifying weight of his new reality. He was a father, a full-time, single father to a daughter who had been through an unimaginable hell. He was afraid of messing up, of not being enough, of the long road of healing that stretched out before them. But underneath the fear was something else, something he hadn't felt since before Elena died. Purpose. His life was no longer about following orders or serving a distant ideal. His mission was right here in this room. It was small and quiet and had his wife's eyes. He made a silent vow to the sleeping child, a promise that echoed in the deepest part of his soul. I failed your mother by not being there. I will not fail you. I will learn to be the father you deserve. I will help you find your laughter again. I will keep you safe. Always. 1 year later, the air in their small, two-bedroom apartment smelled not of bleach, but of cinnamon and something vaguely like burnt toast. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The living room was a testament to a life being lived, not curated. A half-finished puzzle was on the coffee table. A tower of colorful blocks stood precariously in one corner, and a bright blue sneaker lay abandoned in the middle of the floor. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was perfect. Marcus sat on the floor, his back against the sofa, trying to fix a broken toy truck. His life was different now. He had taken an honorable discharge, trading his Master Sergeant stripes for a civilian logistics job that let him be home every night. His days were a whirlwind of school runs, packed lunches, and bedtime stories. It was a harder, more exhausting deployment than any he had ever served, and he had never been happier. A sound from the kitchen made him smile. It was a sound he had longed to hear for what felt like a lifetime. Laughter. A full, unrestrained, joyous giggle. Lily, now 8 years old, stood on a step-stool by the kitchen counter. She was wearing an old t-shirt of his that served as a smock, and it was covered in paint. So were her hands, her arms, and a good portion of her face. She was finger-painting, a chaotic swirl of bright colors on a huge sheet of paper. There were no lines to stay within. She saw him watching and her grin widened. She dipped her hand in the blue paint, and with a mischievous glint in her eye, she ran over to him. Before he could react, she planted a deliberate, perfect smear of blue paint right on the tip of his nose. "Got you," she squealed, dissolving into another fit of giggles. Marcus froze for a second, the cold, wet paint a shock against his skin. He looked at his daughter, her face alight with pure, unadulterated childhood joy. The silent, haunted ghost from a year ago was gone. In her place was this bright, messy, wonderful little girl. His lilybug. The blue paint on his nose wasn't dirt. It was a declaration of victory. It was a medal of honor. He reached out and gently wiped a smudge of yellow from her cheek with his thumb. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You got me." He looked around at the happy mess of their home, at the vibrant life they were building together, piece by piece. The past would always be a part of their story, a shadow that shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They were not just survivors. They were a family. The long road home had been arduous, but right here, in this sun-drenched, paint-splattered moment, he knew they had finally arrived. This story is a reminder of the quiet battles fought behind closed doors, and the immense courage it takes to intervene. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many silent witnesses are there in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, waiting for someone to notice? What is our responsibility when we feel that quiet sense of wrongness, that gut feeling that something is amiss? Is it easier to look away, or is the potential cost of our silence far greater? We invite you to share your thoughts on these questions in the comments below. What does it truly mean to be a protector, and how can we all be better sentinels for the vulnerable among us?